Our next story is from Iraq. The West Asian nation seems to be fed up with the US, specifically American troops. Iraq wants them out. The US has about 2,500 troops in Iraq. They're part of an international coalition against the terror group ISIS. American troops have been fighting ISIS in Iraq since 2014, and they seem to have won. ISIS has been pushed back. But despite the success, the Americans do not seem to want to leave, and this has become a problem for Iraq, especially because of the war in Gaza. Anti-American sentiment is on the rise. Iraq's leaders do not want to be associated with the US any longer. Here's our report.
The United States and Iraq are about to initiate talks over America's withdrawal from the West Asian nation, their second withdrawal this century. Their first was in 2011 after the war on Saddam Hussein. Then they came back to the nation they destroyed in 2014. But this time, it wasn't to attack. It was to defend Iraq against the terror group ISIS. Back in 2014, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria was on the rise. They had captured swathes of territory in northern Iraq and Syria and declared their brutal caliphate in the region. All the regional governments were struggling. They asked for help, which is how the US returned to Iraq. It formed and led an international coalition against ISIS called CJTF-OIR. That stands for Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve. The coalition had 15 combatant members, and it was led by the United States Central Command. The coalition mostly launched airstrikes against ISIS, but they were involved in ground operations as well. That's why the US had sent troops. By 2017, ISIS was crumbling. They barely controlled any territory. Then in 2019, the first ISIS caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was killed during a US operation. That marked the beginning of the end.
A brutal killer, one who has caused so much hardship and death, has violently been eliminated.
By 2021, the US had declared their combat rule complete. However, they didn't leave. They transitioned from fighters to advisors and maintained their presence in Iraq. At present, there are about 2,500 American soldiers in the country. They have been a source of friction for years. They are a political headache for Iraq's present Prime Minister, Mohammad Shia al-Sudani. Al-Sudani became PM in 2022 with the backing of groups friendly with Iran. America's great Asian headache, al-Sudani, has been attempting a balancing act, trying to keep Iran happy, while also maintaining cordial ties with the US. But Iran has no such dilemma.
We have repeatedly expressed our views to the authorities of the countries of the region, including Iraq, and declared that the presence of the American forces in any form whatsoever would not help to maintain the stability and peace.
Al-Sudani has tried to ask American troops to leave for a while now. He had broached the subject early last year, and the two countries had even decided to hold a high military commission last year to chalk out a path towards the US withdrawal. But all that progress stalled last October, when Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th. The US backed Israel, and this has been breeding anti-American sentiment in the region, including in Iraq. The presence of American troops is becoming an even bigger political liability for al-Sudani. It came to a head on the 4th of January, when the US killed a high-ranking Iraqi militia commander in Baghdad. The target belonged to an Iran-backed Shia militia operating in Iraq. The US says these groups have been responsible for numerous attacks on American bases and personnel in both Iraq and Syria. But the slain militia commander was also nominally working under the Iraqi military. So technically the US killed an Iraqi ally, which is what has revived PM al-Sudani's efforts to oust the US troops.
The reasons for the presence of coalition forces were to confront ISIS. The end of the mission of the international coalition is a necessity for the security and stability of Iraq. It is also necessary to maintain constructive bilateral relations between Iraq and the countries of the international coalition.
The Iraqi PM insists that they will maintain a constructive bilateral relationship with the US. But will Washington listen and leave? The US may fear that al-Sudani's Iraq could fall to terror once again. Then there's the Iran angle. How a US withdrawal could be a win for Tehran. But Iraq is sick of the American troops. They have been around in some form or another for over 2 decades. And Iraqis are tired of their interference, good or bad. They want the Americans to head home and leave them to their own fate.